It is my pleasure to introduce Professor Mr. Rupert Herington, who visits us from the University of Leeds Language Center. And this is his 6th or 7th visit to participate in the cycle Around the World in English. Today his topic is Will Great Britain Be Anymore? And he's talking about a controversial topic, the independence of Scotland. So thank you very much for being here. Hello.
Hello, good morning, or good afternoon as it is now. Thank you for the introduction, and it's very nice to be here again, the 6th or 7th time. What we want to do today is to have a look, as Irina's mentioned, at a possibly relevant topic which will affect our country or our nation in the future. You'll notice from the title I'm talking about Great Britain. Does anybody know why we talk about Great Britain?
Scotland is part of Great Britain.
Yes, right, okay, yeah. So, I wonder if you could match the flags. You have the national flag of Great Britain on the left-hand side. Do you know what the other flags, which nations within that they relate to? Yes, yes? That's right, yeah. Okay, so when we talk about Great Britain, we mean the United Kingdom. So the 4 nations joined together, and I'll tell you a little bit about the history as we go through the talk. But the official title is the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And what we're going to be looking at today is the debate about independence for Scotland, possibly to break away from that union and to become an independent state. So I've put together a bit of a summary for you here, and I'd just like you, with the person next to you, have a look at the summary and the words in red at the bottom, if you can complete the summary. So just spend a minute or so having a read of that. Okay, so you hopefully have identified that there's going to be a referendum. It's an opportunity for the people to vote on independence in September this year. And the proposal is being led by the Scottish National Party, who are the leading party within the Scottish government. And the people of Scotland will be voting, as you can see in the picture, a yes/no. Yes, we want to be independent from the rest of the United Kingdom. No, we want to stay part of the country, of the union. So there. So, I'd like to ask you now, if we could just have a show of hands, should the people in a country be given an opportunity to vote on their future? In this case, be given an opportunity through a referendum. Do you think this is a good idea? Those who think it's a good idea, put your hand up. And those who think it isn't? Okay, so based on that very quick survey, the majority of people probably would think, yes, it is a good idea to give people the opportunity to vote on their future. In this case, an open ballot or a closed ballot, which is this referendum. And I think one of the things I hope in this talk today that you will hopefully find interesting is not necessarily about the place itself, but the process of asking people, you know, to decide on their future raises a lot of very interesting issues, and hopefully we can explore some of them together this morning. So, what I want to do briefly is to give you an overview about the country in question, the nation Scotland, then go on to look at some of the key arguments which are being put in favour and against independence, and then finally think about the future. If there is a yes vote for independence, how will that affect the country? And a no vote, what will the question be? How will that affect the United Kingdom as an entity? So, has anybody been to Scotland? Okay. So for those of you who have, you will have obviously noticed some of the important features, famous for its castles, its lakes, its scenery, very beautiful scenery. The country is divided geographically into lowlands, the highlands, the mountainous area, and then a lot of the country is a network of islands, as you can see on the map. So the communications between one area and another are more challenging than in other parts of the United Kingdom. And that's relevant, as what I'm going to talk about in a minute, for the historical context. In addition, the country is famous for its cultural icons. And again, if you think of Scotland, you will probably think of bagpipers, you will think of tartan, you will think of shortbread, some of the food. There are particular things that come to mind when people say Scotland. You may have gone to Scotland in August when there's the famous Edinburgh Festival, which is a typical time to visit. Does anybody know the population of Scotland? Just with the person next to you, can you work out what the population is? It 7.3, 6.3, 5.3, or 4.3 million? No idea. Any advance on no idea? No? Okay. Anybody know?
We think that it could be 6.
Okay. 6.3. Any other ideas?
4.3.
4.3. Okay. It is 5.3 million. And to put that into context, that is similar in size to the region of Valencia here in Spain, just to give you an idea in terms of population size. To give you an idea of the population size in comparison to the rest of the United Kingdom, the Scottish population is about 10% of the population of England, so much smaller, but it's bigger than the population of Wales and Northern Ireland. In terms of density of population, which is also important, it's the least dense part of the country, with only 68 people per square kilometre. And life expectancy is quite important, well, it's very important, is a bit lower than the national average. So a few statistics there for you about the population. What I want to do now is to just give you a very brief historical context, which is important to understand some of the reasons for independence. Again, if you come on holiday to the United Kingdom and you would like to see a Roman construction, I would recommend that you visit Hadrian's Wall. This is a wall that is built between Carlisle, the city of Carlisle in the west, and Newcastle in the east. And it was built by the Romans because, as you know, they colonized the whole of Europe. When they got to what is now Britain, they tried to go into Scotland and they found huge resistance. They found it very difficult because of the terrain, because of the mountains, because of the guerrilla tactics that the local people were using. They decided, well, we just can't make this part of the Roman Empire, so we'll build a wall. And they put this up with heavily fortified forts all along it, and they protected the rest of their empire from the people who were trying to attack them, the barbarians, as they called them, in Scotland. So at that time, Scotland was annexed. It wasn't part of anything at that time. But over time, there were increasing movement by the English to take Scotland, to make it part of and to unite it. And as you may know, the people of Scotland were organised into groups which we can call clans, and each clan had a particular identity and a territory, and in particular the cloth they wear. So if you saw that picture at the beginning of the bagpiper, he was wearing a kilt, which is the particular costumes that they wear, and the cloth is tartan, which is this pattern. Now, some of my family, my great-grandfather was Scottish, and he was a member of the MacFarlane clan. So if I were to wear a tartan, I would wear the MacFarlane tartan, which is on that. So I'm 25% Scottish, so I'm not completely impartial. Again, you may have seen films about this, etc. But again, over the centuries, there was a lot of resistance to the increasing domination by the English, because it was always a much bigger society on the doorstep who were trying to take land further and further north. And if you've seen the film Braveheart, which was the character Mel Gibson was portraying this man, William Wallace, who was a leader of the peasants, of the lowest sort of people in society, who were trying to get better rights. And this was just one example of rebellion against domination by the English and change in practices. But it was not until the end of the 16th and early 17th century that the monarchy, the crowns, the king, in this case, this was James VI of Scotland, he became James I of England, because the English Queen Elizabeth I had died and she hadn't left anybody to become the king or the queen. And so her nephew, who was James VI, took on the monarchy, and he ruled both of the countries quite successfully for just under a quarter of a century. This is relevant because this was the beginning of what we now know as the Union. This was the monarchy, coming together as a personal union, but there wasn't political union for another 100 or so years. So when we talk about the United Kingdom, we are meaning that Scotland is part of England and Wales. England and Wales were joined in political union, as you can see, in 1536. A bit later on, it was nearly 200 years before Scotland was joined, and then another 100 years before Ireland, and then there was the breakaway, the separating movement, and Northern Ireland remained as part of the United Kingdom. Why is that relevant, that very brief history? Because the people of Scotland, since the beginning of the 18th century, a proportion have wanted to be an independent state, and they haven't necessarily had the opportunity. Now they're having the opportunity to vote, to say, we have an opportunity to decide on our future. Wouldn't you do the same thing if you were given the chance? So many people are saying this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to vote on our future. So it's very important in those terms, this vote on independence. So what I want to do now is to look at the debate itself and to focus on some of the key arguments which have been raised. But these are the two main players, well, leading the main players. And they're obviously not the only people who are voicing opinions. Do we know who the gentleman on the left is? That's right, yes. So Alex Salmond is the First Minister for Scotland. So he is the leader of the Scottish National Party, and he is the First Minister. As you may know, the Scottish Parliament was established at the end of the 1990s, and since then Scotland has had its own government for many areas, which we'll look at again. The gentleman on the right? Yes. So David Cameron, who's the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Ironically, he is English but has a very Scottish name. Cameron is a very common Scottish name. Can anybody think what they might think about independence? What do you think?
Cameron is against.
Mm-hmm.
Totally.
Right, okay.
So promoting the idea of unity
Yes.
in many ways.
Yes, that's right, yeah. So they have opposing positions. As Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, he wants for Scotland to remain as part of the Union, and Alex Salmond obviously is promoting independence. So since it was decided that there would be a referendum, there are two campaigns that have been set up. One is the Yes campaign, which is encouraging people to vote yes for independence. And the main theme there is, yes, Scotland will be a better place if we're independent. And that's just some of the things that Alex Salmond has said about independence. And they're doing quite a lot of promotion. So the idea of building a better Scotland, becoming a fairer society, etc. And then this is the No campaign, which is promoting the fact that Scotland will be better if it's part of the Union, stays together. They'll be stronger together, is one of the main things. So let's have a look at some of the main arguments, which I'll explore in a bit more detail, for independence. So one of the main things which is to create a more democratic Scotland. The idea that if decisions are made by people in Scotland, it will be a better society. The second thing is that it will be a fairer society. If the decisions are made more locally, they will be more adapted to the people there. And finally, that people will be better off. They will have more wealth if the money is retained and used locally. So let's have a look at those. But just before we do, another question for you, and if I could ask you to have a show of hands, do you believe that laws and policies should be made more centrally or more locally? For those of you who think they should be made more centrally, could you put your hand up? And more locally? Okay. So not very clear cut. You're not necessarily, this is very representative. I would say that most of us, if we were asked that question, would probably agree that that laws and policies should be made more locally, because probably most people would argue, well, then it's more likely to be better for me if I have, if the policy. However, it depends on what it is. If you were asked, here, for example, in this part of Madrid, to decide on a defence policy for the whole nation, is that a practical way of arranging that sort of policy? So I think it depends on the sort of thing you're being asked to vote on. But again, the whole idea of referendum and the whole idea of this independence debate does raise that issue. So, democracy for Scotland. On the right-hand side, you have a picture of the debating chamber in the Scottish Parliament, which is in Edinburgh, which was built and set up from 1998 onwards, once devolution, this process of devolution, was initiated by the Labour government under Tony Blair. And the idea was that at that time, Scotland would have more control over the justice system, over health, education, local government policy. And obviously, with independence, then the whole range of services and departments would be under the local control. The main attitude here is that people feel that with independence, the Scottish people would then be able to make decisions which they have approved of. Now, the problem at the moment for people in Scotland is that the decisions are made in the government, by the government and the Parliament in London, and many of the people making those decisions are not representatives of the Scottish people because they've been voted in by the other parts of the United Kingdom. So, for example, we have the main governing party at the moment, which is the Conservatives, who are joined by the Liberal Democrats. However, both of the Conservative and Liberal Democratic parties received the smaller number of votes in the last election. So the people of Scotland have not physically voted in that particular administration. So in effect, the policies which are being presented and approved in London are not the ones that the people of Scotland have decided. So one of the key arguments is that with independence, the people of Scotland will have a much better say for the things they want to happen there. The second main argument is that it will be a fairer society. So related to that, the policies which are decided about tax, for example, about spending, about a wide range of issues. One of the promises which the Scottish government has said that after independence, the minimum wage will be set to be above inflation. So hopefully people will receive a better income if they are working in Scotland after independence. The idea of it being fairer than now, where it's set again down in London. Have you heard about the bedroom tax? Now, this is a policy which was set up by the current government in the UK. And as you may know, that in the United Kingdom, many people have an opportunity to receive money for housing, housing benefit, as we call it. So if you earn under a certain amount or you're unemployed, you have a right to apply for a local authority or a housing association, a house that is owned publicly, and you pay a rent which is under the market value. Now, because the government is trying to reduce money to reduce its deficit, they've been trying to find ways of saving money, and therefore they've said to the people who are receiving housing benefit living in these public houses, if you have a free room in your house, then you must either pay us additional money, which is this what's called this bedroom tax, or you must move to a house which is more suitable. Because what they have claimed is that there are families living in 3 or 4 bedroom houses, but there are only 1 or 2 people occupying them. And that they're claiming is unfair. Now, this policy is one of the many policies which were initially implemented in Scotland first. And that gets the people in Scotland very annoyed. And this is a campaign poster against the bedroom tax, which is playing on the theme of Jesus Christ after the resurrection, leaving the tomb, and obviously because the tomb is empty, a tax notice is served on the tomb for extra tax. And out in the desert, there is a luxury mansion with 23 rooms which are free, and they are tax-free. So it's a sort of satirical campaign poster against this tax. Just as one example of some of the promises of the people who are saying yes for independence, say, well, we will remove that sort of measure. And the third main argument is that Scotland after independence would be a more prosperous society. The OECD has calculated that Scotland after independence would be the 8th richest nation within the OECD. As you can see from the screen, the unemployment level is better than the national average. Economic output is higher. It's the third highest region in the UK after London and the South East. So very favourable economic conditions. However, there is concern that the current Scottish government is running quite a high deficit in the 2012-13 year that was at 14%. And there's quite a lot of debate between at the moment about would the Scottish government be able to meet its obligations. You know, it's promising, for example, if you are a student in Scotland now, you don't pay tuition fees. And the idea is that not paying tuition fees would continue after independence, which is contrary to what is happening in the rest of the United Kingdom. So my university, if you come and study at my university, you will have to pay tuition fees of £9,000. The question is it financially viable for the government to continue promising? And there's quite a lot of debate about that. Does anybody know, though, why the Scottish government, Alex Salmond and the Scottish National Party, for example, why are they so confident about the economic future of Scotland? Does anybody know? What is the reason for that?
Could it be about oil fields in the North Sea?
That's right, yeah. So, the oil is a very important point. Before we come on to that, to give you an overview, the main areas, the main sectors of the economy, so defence, food and drink, higher education, financial services and energy, oil being the principal part of that, contribute to the wealth of the nation. And within the food and drink sector, whisky accounts for 80% of Scottish exports. So it's a very important sector for the Scottish economy. And again, one of the debates which is raising is, would Scotland be better as part of the United Kingdom as a global brand with the opportunity to, trade its products internationally, or would it be better independently? The other thing is that Scotland sells more to the rest of the United Kingdom, i.e. the Northern Ireland, England and Wales, than it does outside. So why would you create a physical barrier by being away from that? And that is a debate which is going on at the moment. So oil, yes, very important. It's calculated that as much as 94% of the oil and gas reserves in the North Sea would be part of Scotland's assets after independence, which is giving the Scottish government, Scottish National Party, those who are in favour of independence, great sort of bargaining power. However, again, some statistics there, but to summarise them, the main concern by those who don't believe in independence is that they're saying that's all very well. you may be projecting that you're going to raise a lot of money from the sale of oil and gas, but because of the volatility of the oil price, can you guarantee that in 5-10 years' time, you're going to have the money you thought you might have? And again, the UK government has already said that there isn't going to be as much tax income as the Scottish government had projected. And also, the other fact is that the gross domestic product that oil accounts for at the current time for the whole of the UK is a tiny proportion in comparison to what it might be for an independent Scotland. So an independent Scotland would be much more reliant on the sale of oil, for example, than the rest of the UK is at the present time, which would put them into a much more vulnerable position. So there's quite a lot of debate about the actual details, the economic details. So those are the main arguments: a more democratic society, a fairer society, and a more prosperous society. And let's think about what the situation might be after, should the vote go in favour. In addition, just briefly, energy, in addition to oil, renewable energy. The Scottish Government has made a commitment to 100% of its electricity being generated from renewables by 2020, which is quite a challenge. It potentially, as an area, is a world leader in renewable energy because of the abundance of wind. I mean, if you look at the geography, there's nothing between the north of Scotland and America. So there's plenty of wind, there's plenty of sea for wave power. Those are the main natural resources that the country has. And there is a huge potential for growth. But on the other side of the coin, the debate is about who will finance that. How much does it cost to establish a wind farm or a wave farm, and who will pay for that? And if there is any political uncertainty, would global multinational companies like Iberdrola, who are world leaders in renewable energy production and already own Scottish Power, would they be prepared to invest the millions of pounds, for example, in new renewable energy systems there, for example? So let's move on and think about the arrangements after the referendum. So if in September this year the Scottish people say yes, we would like to become an independent state, a date has been set in March 2016 when Scotland will officially leave the UK. That's if there is a yes vote. In the meantime, from the date of the referendum to that date, there will be negotiations by the Scottish Government with the United Kingdom Government, etc., about all aspects which need to be arranged. For example, defence, foreign policy, the European Union, etc. And we'll look at some of those issues now. One of the things that is planned is that people in Scotland will have to have a new passport. But again, the No campaign would say, yes, that's fine, but how are you going to pay for that? Is it feasible that in a 2-year period or less than 2-year period, you'll be able to make all of the arrangements so that people can have that passport? So there's a lack of detail in the proposal, which is being questioned. Another question for you. Do you think that a country should possess nuclear weapons? Those in favour, put your hand up, yes. Does anybody think a country should have nuclear weapons? Those who think no? Okay, so it seems that a majority here, people think they shouldn't have nuclear weapons. Now, one of the key one of the Scottish Government has proposed is that an independent Scotland would be without nuclear weapons, which in theory may seem to be a very good idea. The difficulty is that the main centre where the United Kingdom's nuclear submarines are based is near to Glasgow, which is a very well-established base at Faslane. And even if that happens, there will need to be a process of removing that particular nuclear weapons base from near Glasgow to somewhere else in the UK. So it's not only the problem of the Scottish government, but it's also the problem of the United Kingdom government of where to relocate it. The defence industry in Scotland employs about nearly 13,000 people, which may not seem to be a lot, but is one of the main industries. So that's another factor to consider. And the British government's position, so the Secretary of State for Defence, Philip Hannam, as you can see there, has again reiterated that the position that he thinks it's better for Scotland to stay as part of the United Kingdom. But obviously, if a vote has been passed in favour of independence, negotiations will be ongoing about what we do with the base at Faslane near Glasgow. How about the European Union? A commitment has been made that after independence, Scotland would remain as a member of the European Union. However, the European Union President, José Manuel Barroso, has said that's not quite so easy, because Scotland would be applying as a new member state. It would have to go through the whole legal process as other new member states. And as you can see here, he gives the example of Spain, saying that they haven't yet recognized the region of Kosovo in the former Yugoslavia as an independent state, and he's saying it would be quite difficult for Scotland. So again, the Scottish National Party is saying, well, yes, well, we would continue to do the negotiations, but the debate at the moment is, yes, but how long will those negotiations take? Will there be a time period where the Scotland has left the United Kingdom, but it's also left the European Union, because no agreement can be made by getting agreement from the other member states. And as you will know, when new member states join the European Union, that changes the dynamics. One thing is for all the other states to agree. The more states there are, the more complicated the decision making is. But also there's the factors about the budget. Each member state needs to contribute a certain amount of money, but is also entitled to receiving money. So it's quite a complex issue. So Europe is one of the debating issues between both sides in the campaign, and there's still quite a lot of uncertainty about it. Similarly is the currency. Again, the Scottish people have been told that after independence they would carry on using the pound, nothing would change. Now in February this year, the British government said that's not the case. So the Chancellor of Exchequer, the British Finance Minister, George Osborne, as you can see there, he said that if you vote for independence, you walk away from the UK pound. Now, since then, there's been further developments and some other statements by other government ministers saying, well, we'll have to see, but it's still looking uncertain. Does anybody know the reason? Any reasons why it's uncertain for keeping the pound? So it's quite a complex issue, so it's not the thing, but I'll try to summarize very briefly. If you go back 5 or 6 years to the beginning of the financial crisis, you may remember that in most European countries, the national government had to put in a lot of money into the banking sector. Do you remember that? Renationalise the banks. And at the time, it was acknowledged that the Scottish government wouldn't have had enough money to be able to renationalise the banks in Scotland. And the financial sector in Scotland is disproportionately large, is much bigger than in other similar regions. This, as you can see, is the headquarters of the Royal Bank of Scotland, which is one of the United Kingdom's biggest banks. And there are several other large financial institutions. And the problem with the Scotland sharing the currency with the rest of the UK is that in the case of a financial crisis, the rest of the UK would have to support financially an independent Scotland, which politically would be very difficult, you know, and the other main issue is that if you do not have a political union with a country, as you will know from the euro, one of the problems with the euro is that the states which have the euro do not have a political union. So the policies, the economic policies made here in Spain are different to those in France and to Germany, etc. And that's what makes it very difficult to control the currency. So there's quite a lot of concern about currency union. And we'll have to see. The other point is, would Scotland be able to adopt the euro? Because there need to be particular economic conditions for that. So another main concern in this debate about independence, in addition to its position in Europe, is what will the currency be? I don't think that I haven't seen much debate about who the monarch would be or the head of state, because it's quite common for countries which were either formally part of the United Kingdom or Great Britain to continue within the Commonwealth. And also because our present Queen is related to Scotland, her mother was Scottish. I don't think there would be a personal problem with that. So our present Queen would continue to be head of state. The Yes campaign, the messages they're sending out are thinking about the future. And in terms of, you know, it will be better for your children, it will be a better society, etc. The No campaign is focusing on the detail, on whether this is true or not, whether it's a reality and the facts and figures. And I think it's coming down to the difference between your head and your heart. So if you think that the Yes campaign is about your heart, it's about identity, how you feel, yeah, who you are as a person, a lot of the arguments by the No campaign are about the head, the rationale. Is there a basis for that? Can you support that with facts and figures? And it's quite difficult, unless you are physically in that situation, to know, you know, which way you would vote. You know, if you were from that region, you may vote more than your head and than your heart. So I'd like you to have a look. These are some tweets which I've put together from people talking about how they're going to vote. And just for a couple of minutes, could you have a read of them and decide how you think the people are going to vote on the 18th of September? Either yes or no. Okay, any ideas for the first one?
No.
No. Yeah. So this idea that being part, you can still have a national identity but be part of the whole is what that person's trying to get across, aren't they? How about the second one? Yes. So they believe that independence will give you democracy. So that's a yes. Yeah. The third one? No. So again, that's a rational argument concerned about the cost of things. Yeah, maybe a wonderful idea, but can we finance it? So they'll probably vote no. The fourth one. So no. Yeah, they're concerned about the worry about the European Union, etc. And the fifth one. Yeah. Okay. So again, that is this main argument about democracy. We've, elected the government. They're going to bring in policies for us. Very important point. And finally,
Yes.
yes, they're going to vote yes. That's right. So I'm sorry, I'm not voting no just to secure the UK's massive ego. And that is the other problem, is that we as English people are very arrogant, and we are because we are the majority, we don't really care about anybody else than ourselves. We're very inward looking. And there's a great feeling, and a lot of, if you read about this, there's a great feeling of that, they just think they're better, and they'll just don't care about us, which is always the problem of the majority and the minority, isn't it? So a few examples of what real people feel about it. And if you log into Twitter, you type in Scottish search for Scottish independence, or Facebook, you'll find masses and masses of information you might like to have a look at. I thought, just coming towards a conclusion, I would very briefly show you the region where I live, which is again in the north of England, not quite up to the Scottish border, but very affected by the wars with Scotland and the movement historically. But very similar population, 5.3 million people, similar national output as Scotland. What does this raise? Should the people of Yorkshire and Humber, that region, should we be independent for sake of argument? Currently there's been no even consideration of it. It's not been raised. I mean, some years ago there was a plan to have a regional assembly, a regional sort of debating chamber, and it was rejected of stop wasting our time, it's going to cost far too much money, keep it in London. So it varies very much, but what you could argue is that this process can sort of spiral and continue, and then each region may want to have more of a voice. So what will this whole mean in the future for the United Kingdom? Will we be able to call it the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland if Scotland votes yes for independence? If they become an independent state, it will become England, Wales and Northern Ireland, and Scotland will go separately. If they vote no, what will happen is that they will remain within the United Kingdom, but I think there will be increasing demands from the Scottish people to have more autonomy, so more control over of their future, over wider issues rather than just local services and local policy. And I think this is a movement, is going to carry on, but it will change things. I think, though, looking at this topic, it does raise quite a lot of interesting issues. One thing is to have the policy, but how can it be implemented? That's the first thing. Secondly, how can you finance a lot of initiatives? And to what extent can regions with relatively small populations, are they able in the modern world to be functioning, entities? And I think the only way you can argue that is to look at each region or each nation on its individual merits. And I would say that the situation in Scotland is individual because of its particular economy, its situation, its history. It is not applicable to somewhere else, for example. Obviously, this is a very relevant topic here in Spain because the same issues are raised on a daily basis. But obviously, Scotland's position is very different to some of the regions, autonomous regions here in Spain. So I'll leave you with some further reading. do have a look at the Scottish Government's white paper on independence, because that will give you all the detail. Have a look at the Yes campaign website, the No campaign, and you can see much more information about this. I hope you found that interesting. Those are my contact details, and I thank you very much. If you have any questions, be pleased to answer them. Thank you.
I wanted to ask about the situation in Wales.
Yes.
Is it that the situation in Scotland has given rise to nationalism in Wales?
At a similar time, a bit later than when the Scottish Parliament was established, there was a regional parliament for Wales, based in Cardiff, with similar powers for local policies in terms of education, health, etc. However, although the problem in Wales is there's not a sort of similar proportion, that the Plaid Cymru, which is the nationalist party, doesn't have the same authority as the Scottish National Party in Scotland. So, and also I think there's more of a recognition that Wales, as a much smaller economy on its own, would not be able to be a separate entity. But things have transferred. I mean, I went to university in Wales, and when I was there, there was a great campaign for independence, which has been partially satisfied by the regional parliament. Yeah.
Yes.
If Scotland got the independence and convert on a member of European Union,
Yes.
is there a possibility that European Union give Scotland money to make the change between pounds to euros?
I don't know the mechanics of how that would work, and I'm not sure whether the currency comes first or member of the European Union. That's a good question. It's quite a complex process, though. Obviously, there would probably be some transfer of funds, yeah. But I don't know how it works, yeah.
There must have been previous surveys conducted to gauge the mood of the population. And what is the mood so far? In favour?
Yes. Again, there are opinion polls that have been conducted since they decided on a date for the referendum. The current position is that it is claimed that the Yes campaign is increasing the number of people who might vote. However, I think if you looked at the current poll, it is still more people in favour of staying within the UK, but the Yes campaign is claiming that they are increasing their share. And it's also very difficult to know, because how many people will actually vote on the day? One question I have is, if the turnout on the day is very low, is the vote still valid? I mean, how many people are actually going to vote on the 18th of September? You know, if, you know, it won't be 5 million people, because 5 million people never vote in any election, do they? But let's say it's 3 million people, let's say, who are eligible, who could vote, but only 1 million people actually go and put their piece of paper in the box. Is that still valid? What about all the people who stayed at home? That's something I would like answering. But I think you will see, as between now and September, as the campaign sort of speeds up a bit, there will be more debates about that, yeah. I think it's going to be very close. I think it will be 49-51. I think it will be very close, personally.
But it also raises some logistic problems, issues for the future. Let's think of the Olympics, for example.
Yes.
So if they achieve independence, everything will change.
That's right.
So, and also I've heard that some Scottish athletes are not in favour of independence,
Yes.
and they want to remain British.
yes, definitely. Yes, huge things. And if you think that the Olympics is a good example with the athletes as an asset for the nation as a whole, if you lose one part of it, I mean, again, some of our best inventors historically were Scottish. We don't want to lose that sort of, it's a brain drain, isn't it? So if some of our best athletes are from a particular part of the country or the nation, one of the nations within the union, we don't necessarily want to lose them, yeah. It raises all sorts of issues, yeah.
Sir, I have a question. You talked about Great Britain's national defence, but what about Scotland if it gets independent? Will they have to have their own army? Or?
Yes, that's right. So a commitment has been that there will be a sort of, I don't know the specific details, but there will be a transfer. If there is a military base in Scotland at the moment, it will be negotiated that that will become part of Scotland's defence force. And one of the arguments which is being raised at the moment is that it's predicted that the defence force in Scotland will be a lot smaller than it currently is. I mean, you can probably think that it's not going to be a nation which is going to be sending troops to Afghanistan or Iraq as the United Kingdom has been doing. So it will be a very different defence force. But there is certainly plans for defence. It's financing that, and where they will be based is one of the issues at the moment.
Do you think that in other regions, for example, if Scotland get the yes, will other regions ask for independence also, do you think?
Again, I think that's a possibility, but compared to, let's say, Spain, for example, other than Northern Ireland and Wales, certainly England, it's less likely. Having said that, if you go to the far southwest, there is the English region of Cornwall, which see themselves as quite more distinct than, let's say, the region where I live do. So who knows, in another 5, 10, 15 years' time, we could be having a same debate for an English region.
Yes, but poorer regions will always have fewer advantages. I mean, not fewer advantages, fewer possibilities for being...
Yes.
So I think
in a sense the politicians, they feel that they can be stronger. I mean, Scottish politicians, because they have oil,
yes,
they can be, I mean, they can organize things because they have money.
Yes,
so
quite possibly. Yes, definitely.
And they make use of that national feeling,
yes,
to achieve more power themselves.
Yes, yeah.
Not so much for the people, I think.
Well, that's another point of view, yes. Yes, definitely. Yeah.
In the case of a victory of the yes, there exists a danger of a population transfer between the two nations.
Possibly. One thing that there is a big concern about, as I showed you that picture of the Bank of Scotland, the Royal Bank of Scotland. Now, Edinburgh has several headquarters of some large companies like that, and certainly any transnational company like that could possibly, they've already, talked about, we will move out of an independent Scotland. So that is one of the arguments which the No campaign is saying, if you vote for independence, be prepared that some of your biggest companies may not be there anymore. Whether they will actually do that is another matter. But it's the political uncertainty which is causing, those sort of questions to be raised. So I think there is a possibility. And if people feel that the economy is not going to be strong, they'll obviously have to leave to go and find jobs. So that's certainly a risk. Yeah, good point.
One question. What about, well, you said, of course, there are a lot of policies that Scottish people don't like, but I'm sure there are also advantages of being part of Great Britain.
Yes.
If people, or the percentage of people that don't want to separate from Great Britain,
Yes.
will they be given the possibility to remain, I mean, even by living in Scotland, to remain British?
Well, I think, yes, that's a very good point you raised, but I think the vote is about a yes or no. That's why it's such a big issue, because it's a simple question. Yes, we're going to remain as we are, or we're going to become an independent state. So it's a very big decision. So I think if the majority decides for independence, then everybody goes. There's not one or another. So, for example, they can't maintain a dual passport, for example. Yeah. So,
more questions? I think we are about to the end. Thank you very much.
thank you very much. Thank you.